Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. And that's pretty much how we would start every video on Search for Signs if it wasn't Search for Signs and it was me going around quoting Shakespeare all day long. I'm just kidding. Typically what I do is I just say, hey, welcome to Search for Signs. It's Tuesday, December the 8th. Hope you're having a great day, that kind of thing. And I do hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. Now, if this is your first time ever listening to Search for Signs, I do, of course, want to welcome and thank you. We have over 300 videos where we talk about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Through the course of these videos, we talk a bit more about who and what Maitreya is, why are the Masters returning now to the everyday world during this historical time, what it means for you and me and everybody living today, and we talk about the principle of sharing and how that will create peace. And we look at the many miracle signs going on around the world and have been going around for decades in all walks of life and all religious faiths and non-religious faiths. And do they point to the fact that the one awaited by all the world's religions is here and has been living in a modern city, namely London, since July 19th, 1977. But I will say this, you don't have to know or believe any of that other stuff. The most important thing is to look at it like this. Maitreya's biggest priority for humanity should be all our biggest priorities, because he says that without peace, there will be no future. Our very survival depends on it. He puts it like this. Without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future for humanity. So it's quite important that we look at what we can do to create peace with a greater sense of urgency than we're doing today. But that's the most important thing that we can probably take from these videos. Now, if you have a question or two about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, I'd always recommend posting your question as a comment, or you can even post your comment as a comment, and if it's relevant, we'll talk about it. Or you can email me at searchforsigns@mail.com. We have a lot of links in the description that give you some background information about this wonderful story from different sources, so you can do your own research in that regard. But anyway, let's get on into it because we got some questions to cover, and we're burning daylight here. Anyway, so let's get on into it. All right, so the first comment comes from Default. I like that. And this person, could be a man, could be a woman, don't want to assume gender, especially these days, this day and age, but says, what the title of the video that I put up was, what if I told you the Christ had already returned? An intro to Search for Signs. And this person so eloquently wrote, what if I tell you the internet doesn't care? It is a fact. Don't hate. Oh, man, I tell you what. I'll tell you this, Default. You're a lot closer than you think. You're a lot righter than you think. That is for sure. No, I don't hate about that. It's so true. But, I do have to comment about this because the reason why people don't care about this, I think there's several reasons. One, I think the Christian churches in the main have pulled the chain of the religious faithful for so many years about the return of the Christ that you're kind of like, yeah, whatever, right? The other thing too is what people, the thought form that people have about the return of the Christ, coming at the end of the world, judging the person, hopefully you're a good enough person to make it into heaven. If not, ooh, that's bad, right? It's a lot for people to really take in on a practical level. And so they kind of put it out of their mind, like, maybe it'll happen. I believe it's going to happen. Hopefully it will happen, but hopefully I'll be taken up into heaven. But for the most part, it's not something that you think about moment to moment as could happen in the next hour. I'm sure there are some people that disagree with that, but that's pretty much for the most people, right? And I don't blame them, because as Benjamin Creme's master so eloquently wrote 35 years ago, and I'm paraphrasing this because I don't have the book in front of me, but he was talking about the return of the Christ and how far from the popular view of the Christ and the return of the Christ is the Christ and his return, that the Christ could walk into a room of people and not be noticed. And so I'll take it even a step further. So far from the notion, or the popular notion, is the Christ that was, the image of the Christ that's been brought down and presented down throughout the centuries, that the Christ could be on TV speaking to tens of millions of people at a time and no one would recognize him because he looks totally different and is speaking totally different than everyone's expecting. And so it is clear that that's the way that the teacher presents himself to humanity. And he's doing it because he doesn't infringe on human free will at all. And so it would be a tremendous infringement on free will to return from the clouds in the way that the Christians are expecting. But anyway, the other thing too is I think that by and large, when it comes to the book of Revelation, just like the fundamentalist Christian looks at the book of Genesis about the origins of mankind, they fail to realize that the symbols that are presented in there are just symbols, but also the time frames in there are also symbols. They're not actual time frames. So in the book of Genesis, for instance, the origin of the universe and the creation of the universe is in 7 24-hour periods, right? Well, scientists would disagree and say it's, billions of eons since the creation of the universe, if even that, right? It might even be longer than that. And then to look at the book of Revelation, I'm of the humble opinion that the single biggest misinterpretation that people have is they interpret the book of Revelation happening within a few week or a month or a year time period. When John was writing the book of Revelation and he was writing down the visions that he had in symbolic form, he was writing about events that were occurring during his time, things that were happening within 100 or so time frame of now, between, plus or minus 100 years of now, right? And then on into the future, a couple thousand years or 3,000 years from now. So, it spans over about a 5,000 or so or 6,000 year time frame. And so it kind of goes along the lines of what somebody else wrote about the Antichrist, said that, it was saying something about the Antichrist. What did they put? Antichrist, false prophet. That's what it was, and I'm always prepared for that comment because, of course, I get it a lot. You got to embrace the suck, as they say. But it's to think that John was talking about just a very brief period of time is a misinterpretation of it. The Antichrist has already come and gone. So people scour the internet probably more so looking for the Antichrist than they are looking for the Christ or the Imam Mahdi or the Kalki Avatar. But it's a sign, it's a very clear sign that people are ready for the Christ or their teacher to come back. The Christ was promised to the Christians, but they failed to realize that there was also a promise made to the Muslims, a promise made to the Hindus, a promise made to the Jews, a promise made to the Buddhists. But also the Christ gave that promise to the whole world that he would come back at some point, like a thief in the night when an hour when least expected. So for people to not be that interested, of course, not now, but eventually when Maitreya is out known for who he is after the Day of Declaration, there will be tremendous interest in who and what Maitreya is and who and what his priorities are. But it takes time for people to come around to. There's a lot of distractions in the world too. So yeah, I agree with you. The internet just doesn't care. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, next question comes from my new friend, Robert Lawrence, who I like to put in the sir at the beginning. It just seems to roll off the tongue. Sir Robert Lawrence. An article in the Jerusalem Post, a mainstream Israeli newspaper, not a conspiracy theory site, today by Aaron Reich, stated that Esht, former head of the Israeli Space Agency, stated openly that the American and Israeli governments and President Trump are in communication with extraterrestrials. Is this linked to Maitreya or a coming world religion or world government? Okay, so the second part of that question, is it related to a coming world religion or government? No, there's no truth to that whatsoever. But is it linked to the emergence of Maitreya? Could very well be, and I think that there is a link to it. Now, if you remember, you might have read this online. I remember reading it online, and actually we talked about it on this channel last year. There were some, and it was just a small little internet story too. It was kind of funny, but it was in some major publications, not conspiracy theory sites. So I get where you're coming from with that. That there were high levels of the Pentagon that were in discussions with high levels of Congress and even the President, Trump, about UFO activity. And of course, Trump came out and he didn't deny having the talk. And this is the important thing. Okay. He didn't deny that they came and talked to him. He did deny, of course, that there was UFO activity. He didn't believe it. Now, whether he didn't believe it or not or whatever, doesn't really matter. But the point of why I brought it up was, I know of no person who works in a bureaucracy, let alone the military and high levels of government, that speaks to the highest levels of government, i.e. the president and members of Congress, would inform them about something that they didn't believe to be true. and jeopardize their career and their future in looking foolish and so forth on nonsensical information. They had to have known there was truth to it, or they would have never even mentioned it to members of Congress, let alone the president, right? So it's just, that's the reason why I think there's truth to it, and according to Ben's master, there are governments all over the world that know about the UFOs and their activity, and they know that they're harmless, and they know they're here. And the biggest culprit in putting out misinformation about the Space Brothers being harmful is the United States government. Now, he went on to say that it's not really the highest levels of government that are involved in this misinformation and propaganda process. It's more mid-level agencies within the security agencies like the CIA or the NSA or something like this, right? That are involved in putting out misinformation that the UFOs are and the aliens are here to take us over. They keep us in fear. They give us all this contrary information, even to the point where they perpetrate fake crop circles and prove that they're fake, right? Because they're maybe like a circle, and then they take pictures of somebody doing it, and it was so and so from the town that's been doing these crop circles, and they look like just a real circle, because they can't really do an intricate design the way that a lot of the crop circles are. You know what I mean? The crop images or whatever the crop designs are more intricate than just a circle. So they put this misinformation out that it's false too, and that kind of thing, to kind of keep people on their toes. And what Ben's theory was, the reason why the governments were doing it, their intention behind it was, if humanity knew, the people of the world knew that there were higher and more evolved members of humanity from, other planets that were here working with us, that we would not look to our so-called world leaders for advice. We would go right to them. So what would happen? They would lose their power. That's the reason why they're trying to keep us separate from them. And they know the truth, that they're here harmless, according to the masters. They know it. Benjamin Creme even went out and said that the United States, the UK, the Ministry of Defense, at some point was going to release classified, formally classified information about the UFOs, because they no longer deemed it as a security threat. See? So don't listen to what they say, watch what they do, is really what it is. And I'm not listening to what Trump is saying about it. I'm watching what they're doing. Why would somebody go to the president and members of Congress and brief them on UFO activity if there wasn't any truth to it, right? And it's the same thing with this. There's probably, in the Israeli government and the Russian government, of course, and the UK and France, they have information on all this stuff. So it's coming out, because people are realizing that you can't suppress the truth you can only suppress the truth for so long. And this is a part of it. And at the beginning of this video, as I always talk about the masters returning during this historical time, well, UFO activity is a part of that historical time. In the not so distant future, peace will be a reality. There will be an end to hunger, eradicated forever from this planet. Justice will be, a keynote in everybody's life, that everyone should have food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and education. People will live much more relaxed lives without as much stress as we're living in today. The knowledge of the masters will be an everyday information. The truth that the teacher is back, guiding humanity, will be known, right? We'll know scientifically, because it will be proven scientifically in a lab, that we are souls in incarnation. We will also know that we're not only not alone in the universe, we're not alone in the solar system. So, we're living in historical times. And times like no other, really. But the UFOs are definitely a part of it. And I will be hopefully next week, I'm going to be interviewing a man named Gerard Artson, who is very knowledgeable about George Adamski and the work of the Space Brothers. So I can't wait to interview him and you guys hear what he has to say, because he's quite knowledgeable about UFOs and UFO activities. So I might even bring up what you talked about here, Robert, to see what he says about it. So he knows a lot more about this about the UFOs than I do. So hopefully that helps. All right. So the other thing, you brought up a couple other questions that were quite long, based off of frequently asked questions on the Share International website, and I'll kind of paraphrase it if you don't mind, Robert. Will the United Nations be the governing body of the world? Will there be another organization? Will Maitreya head up organizations Creme? There are no plans for a one world government. The UN would become, as it is now, to some extent, a debating chamber to air or settle international problems. No other such organization is planned. Maitreya will not head up an organization, but will act only as a capacity of world teacher. Yes, and we talked about that too, I think, in the last video. And then the question, would Maitreya, while not having an explicit world government, lead the different nations of the world into an international tie similar to the one the white nations of the British Empire had in the 1920s? Would Maitreya possibly lead a confederation of nations of the world where all the nations join a voluntary confederation? They are free to leave at any time, where they're election members of a confederal legislature representing all its members. To some degree, I think you're kind of describing the United Nations altogether. From the Master's point of view, human free will is sacred. And we are souls in incarnation, but nations are also souls in incarnation. So the soul of a nation is sacred to the Masters as well. So there will never be a one world government. Each nation has a right to govern themselves, guide their people and steer them in the direction they want to go. Now, in the future, under the hope of the United Nations, of course, disputes will be resolved peacefully. Now, I think it's naive to think that just once Maitreya comes out, is known for who he is, there will be peace in the world and there will be no conflict or disagreements. I don't think that's necessarily what will happen. There will be more of a measure of peace now than there is now, for sure, right? Because people will understand it better that the world teacher is here and will help guide us, and will start the principle of sharing and so forth. But it starts with the eradication of hunger. That's going to be the first thing that we have to do. And if we do that, then people will start to feel more that the world is more of a just place to live. They'll feel like they have more of a say, that they have more of a purpose in life and so forth. But each nation in and of itself might have a dispute with another nation over a resource or land or a border or something. I don't know, right? I'm just using this as an example. Rather than just taking it out on them militarily, they will go to the United Nations and dispute and kind of duke it out in the chambers of the United Nations under the inspiration of the master who will be working and heading up the United Nations. Not Maitreya, but another master. And the United Nations can also spotlight certain problem areas where there might be a future conflict, or there might be corruption that need to be taken care of, or something like this, or there might be some kind of, you know what I'm saying? So I think that peace will be something, and justice even will, and even the principle of sharing will have to be something that is started, cultivated, grown, changed, cultivated, grown, changed, cultivated, and looked at differently, and try this, and let's try it like this, and let's experiment with this, and let's see if this works a little bit better. And then the master or Maitreya might come up to him and say, okay, let's look at, let's try this or try that, that kind of thing. And if humanity does it, they'll see that it probably would work a little better than they're doing. So it's going to be a process. It's not something that ends at a certain time. So that's why I think the United Nations is the hope of the world, as the masters put it, because it will give a constructive forum for them to dispute their thing. But eventually, after decades or centuries or whatever it may be, the United Nations won't be needed in that way, because not only will all the people be seeing themselves as one, all the nations will too. You know what I'm saying? So, there won't be disputes in that way. So I don't think it's a permanent thing per se. It's just, in the interim, until peace is truly at 100%, we'll need a governing agency like that. But that's where I think the extent of it is. And just as Ben talked about, Maitreya will, of course, inspire and give his advice to the United Nations, but it would be headed up more by another master than Maitreya. Because Maitreya will be busy teaching the whole world various things. But anyway, hopefully that helps. All right. And then the next thing you talked about was, and I'll paraphrase it, it had to do with the qualities of Aquarius being the synthesis, right? And it says, is Benjamin Creme's view of the age of Aquarius involving synthesis similar to the Hegelian dialectic of reaching a synthesis and historic development from reconciliation from opposite positions? Dude, I don't know. One way to look at it is like this. Okay, I'll give you a couple examples, and then we'll end the video, and we'll talk about something else in the next video. But the economic structure of the future that Maitreya says is the best is not getting rid of capitalism or getting rid of socialism. It's taking the best of socialism and the best of capitalism, coming up with the best plan for humanity that basically everybody's needs taken care of, plus it also kind of gives a little bit of an upstart. What people love about the capitalism, the creativity, that kind of stuff. He says it surely should be 80% socialism and 20% capitalism. Right now in the United States, it's about 95 to 98% capitalism, and that's not being sarcastic. In 1 or 2% or 2 or 5% socialism, and that's it. And that's including the library system, which is a socialist department of the United States, right? But for the most part, capitalism should not be entered into healthcare. It should not be entered into education. Somebody should not have to choose between their financial well-being and their health, right? It should be given to them as a right. Same thing with college education or higher education or whatever. Somebody should not have to choose between, their educational future and how much they can afford. But as Maitreya says, the markets of the world have a place, but the government shouldn't blindly follow the markets. It should have its place where it was, a long time ago, when it was not steering the direction of the affairs of state, So take the best of capitalism and the best of socialism, not put them against one another, if that's what you're trying to say. The other thing, too, is, Willy Brandt, who was the former chancellor of Germany, came up with the Brandt Commission, which is a blueprint for the principle of sharing. And not long after Maitreya entered London, I think it was either Willy Brandt went to Maitreya or Maitreya went to Willy Brandt, but he went to Maitreya as Maitreya. Now, the times that I saw Maitreya and others see him as Maitreya, they see him as a familiar. He might be a woman, he might be a man, he might be Asian, he might be black, he might be young, he might be old. Willy Brandt actually went to Maitreya and saw Maitreya. Okay, knew he was Maitreya, knew he was the world teacher that came back and that kind of thing. And Maitreya suggested to him to come up with a blueprint for the principle of sharing. Now, he didn't want him to do it alone. He suggested that he get these various viewpoints from extremists, extreme capitalists, extreme communists, extreme socialists, extreme, ecologist, extreme, whatever, right? Left and right-wing politics. And they synthesized it into a true consensus to where they took the best of that everybody had to offer, got rid of the stuff that wasn't perfect, and put it together, and they came up with the Brandt Report. You could read it online. It's written online. So, but apparently when everybody read it, they were all happy with it. It wasn't like they were like, oh, I wish that one idea that I had was in there, that kind of thing. It got voted out by, somebody from this nation or whatever. And so it's more like that. Now, it was quite extraordinary that Willy Brandt did that, and it's not something that happens, of course, every day in economics and politics especially, right? But I think Maitreya, especially being the Christ, he's not going to align himself with the Democrats or the Republicans, for instance, right? He will mediate the two to help bring about a true consensus between those powerful groups to meet the needs of the people. But I think in a lot of ways it will take Maitreya to get at least started in the right direction, because both sides are totally entrenched on on their view being right, that they don't see the other side. You see what I'm saying? But, in the future, it'll be more of take the best of what the Republicans have to offer, the best of what the Democrats have to offer, synthesize it together for whatever they're working on. So hopefully that answers that question, because it was quite long of a question. But I'm not familiar with the person that you mentioned in there, Heligian dialectic. You know a lot more about this stuff than I do, Robert. Anyway, but hopefully that helps, and hopefully we've covered a lot of the questions. But anyway, I do thank everybody and invite more questions in the future, and I hope everybody has a great and wonderful day. You take care.
Help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.